amongst us. We extend our greetings. We extend our greetings also to everyone joining us from different platforms. We have some people on our YouTube channel. We also have others on our Facebook page. Thank you so much for being with us. But it's not my job to open the event. We have the president to do so. So I'm going to hand over to President Prof Mogashoa to open and welcome you all. Over to you, Prof Mogashoa.
Good afternoon, all online watching the Black Forum seminar, Black Forum based in Unisa. Esteemed guests, comrades, all welcome to the Black Forum webinar. The Black Forum is a forum. The Black Forum is a forum that serves as an organizing force that pursues and is committed to the transformation of higher education in South Africa. The Black Forum is based in Unisa. Without organizing ourselves, we will not achieve critical milestones in the struggle for the transformation of the higher education space. We should not fool ourselves and claim we have achieved transformation. The struggle has many frontiers. The struggle is a lifetime commitment. Institutional culture is another side of struggle. We must organize ourselves to advance decolonization and transformation of South African universities. This seminar is one such platform where we are organizing ourselves. As Stokely Carmichael, who's also called Kwame Ture, said, organize, organize, organize. To our speakers, we are looking forward to your inputs and engagement. Prof Zondi, Prof Fikeni, Prof Hlabangane, Prof Motsa, we are excited. Please indulge us with your revolutionary minds. To all online, be an active, engaged participant. Thank you all for being here online. Welcome. Amanda, thank you.
Amanda, comrade. Thank you very much. Now that the president has spoken, I think it's free flow. We're gonna get started with our program on the institutional culture as a weapon for anti-transformation. We have, as our president indicated, we have our speakers ready. We have Prof Fikeni, Professor Zondi, our visitor, who's not a visitor to us. We have Prof Hlabangane and also Prof Motsa and our deputy president to close the session. Thank you very much for agreeing to talk to us today on this very important topic on the institutional culture, which is described as the last frontier of decolonization and transformation in South African universities. As you know that the concept of culture, wherever else you go in the world, the culture of the nation is always congruent with the culture of various institutions. But we tend to not to see that in the lands that were colonized. Today, we want to hear what could be the problem in colonized land. Why is the culture of the society, of the majority of the people, is never the culture of the institutions? Our esteemed guests are here today to help us understand that. As our president has said, please be engaged as possible. We are here to share views. Our speakers are not only as experts, but they're also our colleagues. So we are here to listen to one another, to engage respectfully. My job is very easy, is to just control them, to tell them when to speak, when to stop, when to move on. And then after they have deliberated, we will engage with you all as our audience. Do send us your comments on our Facebook comment section and also on YouTube. We will try by all means to get through to most of your comments. And also those who are joining us through this Zoom platform, you are also free to engage right at towards the end. So to start our program, we have our Prof Somadoda Fikeni, who currently works in the office of the Vice Chancellor and also the principal of the university as the advisor to him. and also as a director of special projects. He will be taking us through the topic, historical advances towards transformation that have been thwarted by resistant institutional culture. We give you 20 minutes, Prof Fikeni, to indulge us. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Program Director Zethu, the President, the Deputy President and leadership of Black Forum, for the opportunity to share some thoughts, to reflect on such a complex subject which has been with us for some time now. And here I try to reflect on the topic institutional culture in higher education, the last frontier of university transformation in South Africa. And it will become clear why I see it as the last frontier when many other efforts have been made to transform. I start by saying that 26 years into our democracy or in our democratic transition is enough for us to make judgments, to review the process, to see the journey that we have been traveling in terms of transforming various institutions in our country. And there we can be able to say what has worked, what has not worked, and why. I do preface my presentation with just paraphrasing what Amika Cabral said: tell no lies, claim no easy victories. Because very often you have found heads of institutions, whether government, companies, universities, saying, I've transformed. But the real lived experience has been the one of alienation, the struggles, the injustices, the resentment and resistance. And therefore we ought to be asking ourselves why there has been this incongruence between the annual reports, between the statistics claiming that we have changed so many managers, we have changed the demographic profile, and yet the experience of the institution is still having the challenges that people are experiencing. I could be saying the same about different departments of government, about different organizations in the public and the private sector, because the same observation applies. And again, I start by saying, what are the questions that we have not asked? What is the knowledge gap in trying to understand the character, the nature of the hegemonic system we inherited? And what are the answers we have provided for the questions we didn't ask? Because that in itself will begin to reveal why institutional culture matters the most. I'll try to simplify this mindful of time. Over the last 15 years, I've been involved in different institutions grappling with the issue of transformation. I led the process of the heritage transformation as the founding COO of the National Heritage Council. And I went on to be the chair of the Eminent Persons Group for Sports Transformation. And recently, I've been involved in inquiries of universities such as Northwest University. As you also know, that recently we had the report on UCT. And it is quite obvious to me that we have underestimated this concept of an institutional culture, because much of our focus has been on numbers. Much of our focus has been on quantity rather than quality. And that in itself, I think, has been the problem that we have confronted. Hence, we find ourselves in 2015, 2016, students calling for decolonized quality education, calling for fees must fall, calling for social justice, calling for roads must fall. I'll just highlight a few aspects of this particular subject. When our universities were trying to deal with the issue of transformation, or bringing what we used to call in the 80s people's education, which sometimes was not well conceptualized, we realized that some universities reacted by simply giving honorary degrees to our liberation icons as a guilt cleansing ceremony. When pressure was put, they then put them as chancellors. When pressure came in some instances, they then put them as chairs of council, members of council. They put them as vice chancellors, and some, they were given management roles. But substantively, you realize that transformation has been very slow. And at times, resistance has overpowered any effort to transform. And I do argue that the reason for that, we tended to focus on the political transformation of numbers. We tended to focus on the economic transformation of procurements. But we have not paid much attention on the hegemonic systems as they manifest themselves in the form of institutional culture. The dominant culture within institutions do determine the character, the orientation, the form of any particular hegemonic system, as Amilcar Cabral has stated, and as Antonio Gramsci in various works has also indicated. So we've had quantity transforming, but the qualitative aspect, the essence of the institution, the norms, the rituals, the values, the orientation of the institution has not, in essence, transformed. And one of the reasons for that is that within a space of 26 years, we've seen a dramatic change in terms of student enrollment, which was recorded as transformation. Of course, even there was an interesting phenomenon. Whenever Black students moved into certain programs or moved into residencies, white students would move out to occupy spaces outside. And you also have had some changes within management. But at the core of the academic enterprise, the professors, the scholarship, the literature, as well as the overriding institutional culture, you have had very little of that change. Ambassador, you'll know that even in terms of our diplomatic deployments, you'll find in some instances when you travel around the world that the ambassador has changed, the deputy ambassador has changed, the consulate has changed, but the core staff has not changed, that gather data. So the institutional culture remained at the very core, which means we misdiagnosed the character the nature of the institutions that we were inheriting. And we were satisfied with equity numbers, and we have not delved deeper into the issues and the essence of content. And that is the reason why you have had this outcry for decolonized education, for Africanization of our institutions, for removal of certain statues, for changing of names, because even though we might be a numeric majority, we're still a cultural minority in most of these institutions. Hence, you find the deep levels of alienations.
I did get it.
Hmm?
Yes, it wanted me just to press on audio. So I press the audio and I can hear now.
Okay, thank you. And if you read books in South Africa, they say, who rules South Africa? Where is the locus of power? People are often referring to people who are holding political positions instead of referring to what constitutes power, which is often defined by this institutional culture. I will give you some examples to demonstrate the point. The first one, you find that at the academic enterprise core, you may have some changes here and there, a director there, a dean there, and so forth, but very often the essence of the material, the orientation, the philosophy is still the same. The notion of what is success, what is failure, the notion of what is good work, what is bad work, the ecosystem of publications has not transformed because the institutional culture is still very much embedded in the pan-European and pro-Western orientation that it was. It is for that reason that you can start from the first year into your last year without ever reading about African contribution to human civilization, without ever reading about the Asian contribution to human civilization, without ever reading about the ancient Maya or Native Americans, the Incas, and so forth, because the system has been primarily a pan-European enterprise, but it has presented its grand narrative as being a universal human experience. And most of the time when we say what is quality, what is performance, what is accepted norms, we are operating within that particular space. Even our laws, even our best practice, even our constitution is still very much embedded on your Roman Dutch law, the English law, is very much embedded within that dominant institutional culture. So within our universities, many would have wondered why the 2015-2016 student protests in universities became so ugly and so intense in historically white institutions that often are the elite institutions in our system, which have always proclaimed to be liberal, to be more open to other ideas. The reality is that most of these institutions never reflected critically to themselves to see what weaknesses were there. Some African institutions, yes, were able because much of the blame of apartheid was often presented on their doorsteps, but of course they didn't necessarily take steps to transform. But with the English-speaking institutions, they believed that one, they were not responsible for apartheid, therefore there was nothing to change. Two, they were ranked highly globally, therefore they couldn't disturb that which was working. And three, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the dominant narrative which Fukuyama called the end of history, was that the Western ideals, the Western values, the Western systems, economic, political, social, had succeeded. So they didn't see a reason. They became the local representatives of the global dominant system. Hence the alienation that you were beginning to see, because it was not giving alternative voices to all other role players. It was not giving plurality of epistemology. It was not giving any other space to other experiences except the pan-European experience, as I have indicated. How do you then determine the institutional culture? Because that is one of the most difficult things. In essence, it doesn't present itself demographically where you can say this year it was 60%, next year it's 70%. The informal corridor talk, the informal cultures, the informal meetings, the underlying, undergirding value systems are the scaffoldings of institutional culture, especially the dominant one. Let me give you a few examples in this particular case. When I came, I may use my own experience as well. When I came to Unisa some 6 years ago, I approached my Department of Political Science because the main aim was to increase my academic profile. And I said, I would like to be part of your mailing list and be part of seminars. I would like to supervise students. No one said no. They said, we're looking into your matter. 6 years later, they are still looking into my matter. The chances are, if then I apply and say I want some role within the department, they will say, but how many people have you supervised? The very supervision they have actually been withholding. Similarly, if you look at institutions like UCT, we learned that informally you would have different groupings meeting, having an influence on what would have bearing on formal decision-making. As the report has indicated, at times, even the assessment of the deans, you find the black deans being the ones failing. And when you try to find reasons, it's hard to find. Then they are referred for coaching. And the coaching ecosystem is still referring you to the very same people you are trying to confront, you are trying to transform. So it is the same experience in sports. It is the same experience in other institutions that you would have, such an experience. There was a student who died at the Northwest University. That you would have, such an experience. So it's a playing back to me. Thank you. This student who died, a black student at University of Northwest University, when we went to investigate, one of the things we realized, the university had started a scholarship saying this is the way we are going to make up for this student who died in a swimming pool during their initiation ceremonies. Because he couldn't swim, they pushed him into the swimming pool. So he died. So they said, we're going to name a scholarship after him. And the family wanted to come to the university to do the ritual of repatriating the spirit. And the university refused and said, no, this is private property. Now again, the dominant culture didn't understand that you could repatriate a student spirit without harming the property, without removing bricks and so forth, because the dominant culture has never interested itself to have a meaningful dialogue and understand other cultures. So I'm giving you some of these anecdotes so that you could see, or you can see, what constitutes these dominant institutional cultures. Of course, I want to raise another issue, mindful of time, the one of counterculture. I could have given you many other examples, but the one of counterculture, when you transforming or trying to challenge hegemonic culture, you also develop counterculture, whether it's the one of resistance or the strategies you deploy, or the culture, the norms, the values, the traditions that we often develop over time as a way of responding to the dominant culture. Of course, there are various countercultures to this, of course, ranging from assimilation. Other people assimilate to the dominant culture because they want to advance their career, and there is no consciousness or activism in their activities. So they'll look at what is expected of them. They may even ask, which journals must I go to? Which topics should I look at? So that they can be validated and accepted in terms of the standards of dominant institutional culture. Whereas others may organize themselves as a counterculture to subvert, to resist. And in that particular process, we must over time also interrogate the countercultures, because in that process, they themselves need critical introspection. In some institutions, they may also organize themselves as cartels instead of looking at this as a movement, instead of looking at displacing the dominant culture. The alternative culture might also have its own patronage networks. It may also have its own ill tendencies, which may simply replicate some of the systems from the culture, the very dominant culture they wanted to challenge. So what is to be done as I summarize and close? I do think that we ought to pay greater attention to the notion of institutional culture, right from symbols to syllabus, the curriculum, into some of the assumptions we make. For example, if we say we are transforming, we want to be an African university, what does that mean in essence beyond the cliche? And how do you evaluate and impact assess what that particular transformation would be? And how do you incentivize people who are moving in that direction? Because if you say you want a contextually relevant education, an African, based content which is equally globally competitive, would you still incentivize scholars, some who are doing Shakespeare, some who are doing European history, some who are still very much part of the establishment, the same way as those who would be experimenting, innovating, unearthing alternative histories? Because if you look at the whole value chain of what scholarship means, it is embedded within the dominant culture. And therefore, a deliberate effort, one, to understand the nature of this kind of resistance. Institutional culture resistance doesn't come announcing. I'll just give you the last anecdote and stop. Whilst at Unisa and elsewhere in other institutions, I noticed something. Black managers come in, they preside over a middle layer of people who have been in the institution for some time, who have their own networks. And now, when council or senior managers are asking for certain documents, such documents are withheld, they are not forthcoming. Then council or senior managers will make a determination that the managers we have are useless. I asked for this document and that one, it's not forthcoming. You have sent emails to everyone who is supposed to give you the document. All of a sudden, in my own space, when I was next door to a white colleague who had been with the institution for a long time, I developed a tendency whenever I was not getting joy of getting documents from many colleagues who were sitting on documents. I went to him and he made the request within an hour you would have all the documents you wanted, which you had sent to the portfolio managers and you didn't receive any response for 2 weeks. And that in itself is a very quiet, silent resistance to say, yes, put these managers, but we will simply withhold information, will frustrate them. So when you want to dismantle institutional culture, understand the entire ecosystem of that institutional culture and how it works, how it resists, and sometimes how it resists passively by not opposing anything, but simply making things not happen. And it is for that reason I submit, colleagues, that whatever we do in the transformation space, some greater degree to investigate, understand, analyze the character of institutional culture as a manifestation of dominant hegemonic systems warrants more attention, or else we will celebrate when Fikeni gets promoted, when Siphamandla Zondi becomes head of department, and think that represents transformation. It merely represents possibility of advancing the struggle towards transformation if those individuals remain through. But if those individuals are careerists who only respond to the pressures of what must be done in terms of what the institution needs, which conferences should you go to, mainly they are Western, then we won't go too far in terms of transforming the institutions. And the sad thing about institutional culture, you feel it, but you struggle to measure it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Prof Fikeni. You laid the ground beautifully there, telling us this process is actually quite very complex. We shouldn't be caught sleeping when we see you made us see that we've been participating in a dangerous game of blackface where we just change the faces. And what happens to those people who are put in these positions of power, it's totally a different story, which is in its nature very anti-transformational. Thank you so much to the audience for keeping your microphones on mute. Please do note the questions or points of engagement you have for Dr. Fikeni. You will raise them quite much later when we are done with all the speakers. As I was saying, he's touched on so many issues that are important. One striking for me is the fact that we are a numerical majority, yet we are very much a minority culturally, especially in our institutions, and also providing very practical examples of the games that are played to make Black people who are put in positions of power to actually not succeed and to appear incompetent and sending a very bad message there. That's what we do when we get into these positions. And to be mindful of the other angles. I'm sure our speakers will touch on them epistemologically. What is the culture? Prof Fikeni touched briefly on it, but our next speakers will touch on them as we move forward. Our next speaker right now is our very own Prof Zondi. We still lent him to the University of Pretoria, but he very much belongs to the University of the Nation. He currently works in the Department of Political Science at the University of Pretoria, as I have said. His work pretty much centers on what he calls African decolonial research work, but he also touches on issues of the ways of teaching and the ways of doing research that is pretty much decolonial and African. So tonight, Prof Zondi will be talking to us about, still on the topic of institutional culture, about the autonomy of our institution versus the democratic principles. So Prof Zondi, the stage is yours. You have strictly 20 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and thanks to Fikeni. Touch on a lot of things. I'm going to have to kind of work around it and tease out certain things so that we might have a good debate. It's a broad subject, it's an important subject, but it's a subject that is not new. In 1987, Professor George Nzongola Ntalanja comments on the challenge facing Africa. He notes three things. One is that the basic promise of independence had not materialized, even for the tiny minority that has become rich and become powerful, because the dream of freedom was not only about access to the bread and the crumbs of the bread on the table, but was about reimagining the space. He makes a second point that, and therefore the genuine liberation for him and for Africans all along had been about fundamentally transforming the inherited structures of the state and economy in order to make them capable of serving the interest. It observed that had also not realized. There had been reforms of the inherited structures, but not transformation of the inherited structure, though the reforms were called transformation. That's very important. There had not been transformation, but there had been reforms. But the reforms had been called in palatable ways transformation, when they were actually merely reforms, which kept the inherited structures in place. And therefore the fundamental challenge facing the bourgeoisie, the African bourgeoisie, is the fact that they have to pursue the aspirations using inherited political, economic, psychological, cultural systems that remain unchanged, but that are ill-suited for meeting those objectives. Very important for me to start with those and indicate those, because we need to realize something. Secondly, 30 years earlier, a great revolutionary called Amos Césaire writes a short essay called Discourse on Colonialism. In the Discourse on Colonialism, he invites us to discuss about colonialism, and then he says it's a civilization. Actually, it's not all the things you see. It's not a white government. It's not even a white control over us, but it's a particular civilization which produces problems it cannot solve. It's a particular kind of civilization that haunts people later, and they do not see what actually haunts them. It's a kind of civilization that outlives all the other we do, including independence. And around 1955, independence had not arrived. He says that. Then he asks us that the best way to deal with colonialism which could also be apartheid, which it could also be imperialism, which it could also be global anti-Black racism, could be globally racism generally, and so on and so on. He said the best way to do is to ask a different question of ourselves from the usual question about how do we remove this thing, how do we do it. He says we should ask what fundamentally is colonialism, which means what fundamentally is this that we are trying to remove. Unless we ask that question, we will not acquire the consciousness and develop the policies and develop the measures that will deal with the problem we are dealing with, but will deal with the symptoms we are dealing with. 35 years later, Ali Mazrui writes and is asked to give a series of lectures. He decided to call this series of lectures African Condition. When asked why does it mean that, he says, I imagine that Africa has arrived at my clinic, and I imagine that I'm a health worker, and Africa has come to me because Africa is feeling symptoms. Indeed, we can confirm Africa has a flu, and indeed we can confirm Africa has a heart problem. Africa really has a kidney problem somewhere. Occasionally, Africa also has a sprained ankle. And then it says, I've been invited as a person who must help imagine a future to understand the condition of this person. And then it says, in order to understand the condition of this African body, the body that is Africa, I'm being asked to realize that though there might be a headache today, and then tomorrow is a stomach ache, another day it's a psychiatric problem. All of these are symptoms. These symptoms can occupy me year in, year out until I get tired. Dealing with a headache today and then stomach ache tomorrow, then the headache will come back the next month. And I keep healing this thing. And I'm curing this thing, but I'm not healing this body. And so he invited us to understand that there's a fundamental African problem. And then there are also symptoms that we deal with. I think it's important to put those things on the table. Lastly, in 1999, Ngugi wa Thiong'o started to talk about what he calls something torn and something apart about Africa. He says something, if you are an African, you would understand when somebody says, I had something walking on our roof last night. And when somebody says, I feel that something is not right about this. And that is exactly what Dr. Fikeni was saying earlier on when he was saying, we know it is there, but we can't measure it. Something torn and apart. When he explains it, he says, something happened to Ngika, captured, had his head chopped off. Something happened to Ota Obenga in the DRC. His head was captured, his head chopped off. Something happened to Otakun out in the Benin Valley. He was captured, his head was chopped off, and all of them were then had their bodies buried facing down and facing away from a mountain. Among a people who believe that the departed must be buried seated because they don't stop working. Among a people who believe that they must be buried facing the sun, toward the sun. And the people who killed them after they had been captured, so there was no need to keep them. And then decapitated them. They didn't need to decapitate them. That's what I mean. You have already defeated them, decapitated them. Second, they took the head, moved them to Europe, and kept the body in Africa. But the body in Africa was the body without a head. And the body was not on its feet, nor on its bums, but the body was facing down with its wound facing the ground. That's how they were buried, right through. And in all of this would be followed by a finding of a person called Enongawuse. There was Enongawuse found in what is modern day Eastern Cape. There was a non-Hausa found in Angola, and then found in the northern part of Mozambique. There was a non-Hausa found in the southern part of Mozambique, which is that African woman who's going to be called a witch, who has to take the blame and shift the blame for the curse back to them, so that the European lives without any moral obligations for the centuries and centuries of repeated problems and unending hauntings that never ends. That was it. And that is it. And he calls it dismemberment. He said there was a dismemberment of a person from their body, which is a dismemberment also of the mind from the person. And the mind was taken to Europe, the head taken to a museum in Europe. It was figurative, because indeed their theories, their philosophies were taken from their physicality, which is African, and they will acquire a mind which is European. So there was a dismemberment at a physical level, at a political level, and people were separated from their bodies, people were separated from their land. The land was cut as if a body cut with a razor, and it has things that are called borders, which are actually scars, and that these people were also separated from their history and their memory, so that they should never remember back to where they were not slaves. They can only remember back to where they were slaves. So that a person today must remember being Xhosa, though being Xhosa and being Zulu and being Sotho is a new thing, it's a 19th century thing. They were something before they were Xhosa, before they were Zulu, before they were Sotho, before they were Tswana, before they were Ndebele, before they were all of these things. That history is cut off so that they remember the tribal one, which was manufactured by missionaries. So there was a deliberate process, and it argues that solutions would require us to understand that and seek rememberment. Now, if you remember only by collecting the head of Ngriga from Europe and not correct the minds of Ngriga's people from a European thinking, you are only doing the physical rememberment, you are not doing the full rememberment. That is very important. As I wrap up, I'm just putting those things in there. I wrap up. It's very important to notice that, therefore, institutional cultures are cultures that were built in a particular way with a very clear design to impose a particular civilization in lives of people. But this civilization would be a civilization of death. It would be a civilization that makes possible for a Mayosi to die, though he's an excellent scientist. At the same time as Dladla, who is not very good, also dies. It's a civilization, it's a curse, it's bogey, it's a demon. And therefore this thing was deeply spiritual, deeply psychological, and deeply psychiatrical, and deeply cosmological, and even deeply paradigmic. Now, when we talk about institutional culture, we are talking then about that curse that happened, that create conditions in which Black lives are dispensable, in which the lives of those who are conscious are also killable, in which violence, barbarity, falsity, silencing, suffocation, exclusion, mimicry are normality. Whether in the academic environment or in the HR processes or all of those things. Those processes are not other. But those processes are happening in the world order itself, are happening in the nation state, the country, are also happening in institutions, be it a university, a school, a hospital, and all of those things. It's an invisible power, therefore. And the power that cannot be fought only through visible means, cannot be fought only through policies and charters, can't also be forced by only bringing Black people in there. Because a bewitched person being asked to go into a bewitched place, to solve a bewitched place, is actually looking for a bone in a banana. It is deeper than putting Black people in positions of power, because those Black people must first be ostracized themselves. They must themselves overcome the condition in themselves so that they don't reproduce this and become what Frantz Fanon talks about in Black Skin, White Mask. And therefore, all the transformation tools that they've been doing, all the transformation work that we do, all the campaigns for change they're doing, have this one fault of not understanding what Mazrui meant by condition. The condition at Unisa, the condition at UP, the condition at UCT, it's a condition. They have not understood that. And the transformation charters aren't geared to understand that. They are simply geared to return the head of Yinsa from the physical head, from a physical museum in Britain back without returning the other head of Yinsa, which is the psychological head, which is the philosophical head, which is the spirit of being, and all of those things back to themselves. Returning a head is returning just a physical body, and that is not the biggest of our problem. The most important problem is what happened before the head itself was cut. It was a spiritual thing. It was a psychosocial thing. It was to build a civilization that is permanent, knowing that Black people, when they come, they will only want to fix the things on the surface. Lastly, therefore, there is a huge danger in that in our response to this, we seek replacement. Replace a white person with a Black person. But the two come from the same world. The white person and the Black person come from Europe. It's just that the Black person has his body coming from Africa. But they come from the same world. We have run a challenge of fundamentalism, where we find narrow paths where everybody must fit in, and we don't create alliances across the board. You look for this one group and you fight for this one group and exclude other people. We also run a danger, lastly, of calling it transformation, when actually all we are trying to do is mere reform. After we solve one problem, we bring all the universities that have a black VCs, heads of departments are Black, directors are Black, but the Black people themselves are white. Secondly, the institution itself is white, and you are asking a Black-white person to solve and de-white an institution to which he is born. It's a huge problem. We need to reimagine the world, reimagine the state, and reimagine the institution that you ask me how. We need to go back to how Mazrui explains it, how Ntalanja explains it, how Ngugi explains it. It's not new. They've been dealing with it for a long period of time. One critical example of how. At the end of his book, Black Skin, White Mask, Fanon says, he makes a prayer. And I believe we must make a prayer, because what happened to us was first spiritual, psychological, before it became physical. I must remind you of what Sheikh Ante Diop said. He said imperialism that we're dealing with is like a prehistoric hunter. It doesn't capture a thing. It first surrounds it, haunts it for a period of time. It tries to run, it cannot run. It is captured already tired mentally, though it is still physically strong. So there was that haunting that happened, which is why Vasco da Gama arrives in this place in 1491. But the actual physical capture only happens over 150 years later. And all of that. So Fanon then says the prayer. It says, my body, make me a person that question. My body make me a person that question. If we can teach everybody to start to question, including question our Black agenda, including question the achievements we have made, even question the proposals we have made, and question them fundamentally, as Césaire put it, we might actually begin this journey. but we do need to say a prayer for Africa, a prayer for ourselves, because this thing is deeply spiritual in my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zondi, very much. I'm trying to open my video. Thank you, Professor Zondi, very much. I don't know what's wrong with my video. Oh, there we are. Thank you, Prof Zondi. What a beautiful input here. It ties in very well with what, as you've been saying throughout your presentation, with what Prof Fikeni, with how he started and finished. You're reminding us that this is a civilization of death. It's therefore a pathology that fragments, it separates, it dismembers. That's why you will have in its health system, in its deadly way, it will have a healing of the head, like you were saying, a healing of the spirit, a healing of the physical. Yet in our African epistemology, impilo impilo, asinampilo yenhloko, nempilo yenhliziyo, nempilo yomphefumulo. When you are healing a human person, you are looking at a person as a whole, as umuntu as a whole, spiritually, psychologically, physically, whatever else. There is no fragmentation. And also you reminded us as well to always be mindful of the fact that we need to deal not with symptoms, but with the underlying issues. Like you always say, what fundamentally is the problem? Is the critical question that we should be asking ourselves. There are so many comments I could read. People are enjoying the talk. Keep on posting. We would read as the time goes on. And remember to keep your mics on mute. As we move on now, we will call upon Professor Hlabangane, our sister from the Department of Anthropology. But she's also coming to you here as an executive member of the Black Forum. Prof Hlabangane has done meaningful work, has been actively participating in the decolonial and re-Africanization activities within the University of the People and also at the College of Human Sciences. Today, as indicated in the program, Prof Hlabangane will be speaking to us on the topic of embedding the praxis in scholarship, developing a new scholar, a new African scholar, and also dealing with the higher education culture. Over to you, Sis Hlabangane. I didn't do justice to your introduction. I know you don't like to only be associated with what you do at the University of the Nation. I know you do quite a lot of other things in your role as umuntu, in the community, in the family, and in every other space you occupy. Thank you. Dr. Hlabangane, Prof Hlabangane.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I do not know where to begin, precisely because it is after my very own teachers that I'm expected to speak. They have said a mouthful, to which following it is not an easy task. Being tasked with the task of praxis in education and praxis as we walk the corridors of the academy, what I thought I should do in my prayer, as well as Prof Zondi was enjoining us to do, is to pay tribute to the many teachers who have given me much to think about and from whom I borrow as I traverse the corridors of the academy, which both speakers before me have elaborated on for their violence and their danger to our very well-being as people who seek to define ourselves beyond the spirit of death that they carry as a matter of fact. So I thought that I should use a PowerPoint in order to guide my thoughts, because as Prof Zondi said, it is a very big topic that we are being asked to engage with, and it is one that can take us in many directions. But I will be building on from what has already been said in more ways than one. And perhaps just to start and say that my beginning thought really does coincide very well with both speakers, especially Prof Zondi, who showed us how blank we as African have become, and how blank we have been made, to the extent that we have been consigned to the other of history, to the extent that even though we are a numerical majority, we always find ourselves as paupers in these spaces that we inhabit. So I'm not sure what happened to my PowerPoint. Prof Fikeni began by saying that we should also be very mindful of the questions that we have not asked, and the questions that we cannot even ask, given that this thing is so ubiquitous, to the extent that, as we understand that culture is like the water that we swim in, and for that reason, we are hard-pressed as fish who are swimming in the water to be able to really define and say what it is that the water is made up of. But it is imperative upon us to do that, because it is work that our ancestors have left us with. And as a starting place really is to say that Marimba Ani, I think, in line with what both speakers have said as well, shows us that as Africans, we have been visited by what she calls the Great Maafa. What Prof Zondi has said, that is our dismemberment and our scattering all over the world, to the extent that we have become alien even to ourselves. And for that reason, even the grounding that we stand upon, the very idea of the university, as we always say in the university, that in itself is indicative of the fact that we find ourselves in a hegemonic space that has nothing to do with us, whose spirit is not of us, and for that reason cannot be hospitable to us. And so finding ourselves in this space that takes away from us so much, we have this problem of even fearing our own freedom, to the extent that, as Prof Fikeni has been telling us, that even the way that we define the question has always been caught up in the very confines that the freedom that we have been given allowed us. So instead of demanding and really agitating for freedom from our own point of view, we have been endowed with this fear of freedom only because we are people who have been hollowed out, people who have been humiliated, on a great scale, and people who have yet to realize themselves. And so defining the problem is an absolute imperative, because, as we always say in all walks of life, 26 years later, what happened? Where did we go wrong? And my submission this evening is very is very simple. To say that if we transform the people, then we transform the institutions. And with that, I want to say that I once went to a seminar where it was declared that our languages are in ICU. And somebody retorted that the languages cannot be in ICU when the owners of the speakers of the languages are also not sick. So if the languages are in ICU, it means that even the speakers of those languages are in ICU. I think Prof Zondi does a good job really showing us that the very idea of an institutional culture that is weaponized is not a new thing. It is a fact of life. It is a fact of life wherever we find ourselves in this contraption called South Africa, which we have yet to record with in deeper ways than we have been doing, which many people have said, in fact, it is not a nation that has anything to do with us. It is remote controlled from elsewhere. And because it is the very grounding on which we stand is remote control from elsewhere, then that makes us puppets who are playing along to someone else's tune. So the idea of being in the university, I will borrow again from somebody whose relationship in the university has been very central for my own well-being. And that is my very good friend, Josephine Malala, who tells me that, Nok, when I always come into the university, there's this sense that I should die. She puts it very poetically to say that as an African person who seeks some measure of consciousness, you have no choice but when coming into the university, coming into contact with the university, you have to die at the point of encounter. Precisely because the university as it is designed, the university as it is lived, does not allow you to come in as you are. So in order to survive even one day, you have to always die at the point of encounter. So, and in that vein also, just now in March, we had it just before lockdown, we had a seminar, and I posed the question to Prof Ramotse, and I can't remember what the question was really, but it had to do with something about our institution and the institutional culture. And he very simply said to me, I hear your question, you keep saying our. Who is this our? Because even the very building of Unisa that we are in, is reminiscent of the dromedaries or one of the ships that, came in 1652. So even the very space that we go into every day as we seek to do work, is very much symbolic of the conquest that we experience every day. And as Ngugi Wationgo says, that it is a space that, makes us hate everything about ourselves and makes us people who are conquered and decimated, and who, in fact, exhibit the silence of the dead, even as we profess to speak. And I will make a distinction between us being present in the university physically versus the idea of presence, the very idea of having the ability to also influence and inform. So coloniality has been said to be, the act of first and last resort. It is the mover that is not movable. So as Prof Zondi was saying, and I think Prof Fikeni as well, that whatever else we do, trying to move this institution it is work that perhaps is not up to us as it exists today. So the very idea of the university and the people who are in the university says to us that we are inhabiting a space that is always hostile, a space that has really nothing to do with us, and a space that even as we try to transform, and I do have slight problems with the very idea of transformation, because we may want to transform, but if we do not, as a people, define the direction to which we want to transform, then change will happen, and it will be change that will always surprise us, and it will be change that will always perhaps work against us, as we have seen in the last 26 years. So this change that we are seeking within the university needs to be defined in deeper ways than we have been doing so far. Prof Nemachena, he came and spoke at our Africa Speaks, and he told us about this. He gave us this motif of a rider and a horse, in which we are being ridden. The horse cannot tell the rider where to go, but the rider will always tell the horse where to go. And for that reason, hence we find ourselves with the nervous conditions that we exhibit in the university, as shown, by our death in symbolic and actual ways in the university. So what am I saying really? What I'm saying is that this idea of dying at the point of encounter, perhaps some of us, will want to engage with it, and to speak to ways that we do it every day. When we ask students to work against themselves, when we ask them to be objective about that which concerns their lives, when we train them to fight against their own nature in service of some objective called being objective, then are we not actually also killing them or asking them to kill themselves in order to make it in the university? Both speakers before me showed how it is that we do not quite make it in the university. And when we do make it, we make it by sacrificing, putting ourselves out there as sacrificial lambs. We make it by exhibiting this nervous twitch of, on one hand, knowing that the truth is not what we are living. The very many sacrifices that we have to make every day that work against our very souls. So when we ask students to imbibe these sensibilities that have nothing to do with them, that Prof Zondi said come from a civilization of death, a death that is never assuaged, but one that is always looking for more sacrificial people, for more people to devour, and we partake in doing the same to our students. Here, I want to read something that says, colonization eliminates the possibility of speech by the colonized, precisely because it imposes the conditions of its appearance. In other words, to be in the university and to survive and to make it and to succeed, one needs to be able to imbibe a sensibility that is outside of oneself. One needs to value things that have nothing to do with oneself. One needs to die at that point of of encounter, precisely because this space needs more and more people to sacrifice. So the death of Prof Mayosi that, became so well publicized is only just a symptom, as Prof Zondi was saying, because as I'm trying to argue that we are called to die in all sorts of ways every day in order to make it in the university. So to perhaps answer Prof Fikeni by saying that perhaps we should rejoice that we as Black people do not quite make it in the university. Because if we come to a point where we have actually mastered the art of working against ourselves, then I think then coloniality would have won altogether. As long as we are agitating, as long as when we get there, we feel agitated, as long as we do not feel represented, as long as we feel like we are fish out of water, I think then we have the chance to keep asking the questions that we need to ask and not be complacent and that complicit in our own slaughter. So to move forward from the problems that are, and to begin perhaps to say what is to be done, what really glimmers of hope and light might we see after contending so very thoroughly with this great Maafa, this death that has visited us in all aspects of life. Like Prof Zondi was saying, that Mayosi will die, he is celebrated, he's accomplished. But when Mayosi dies, somebody else in deep slaughter is also dying. So in other words, we are all equal. As long as you are Black, this system seeks your blood, and this system will deal with you one way or the other. Whether you have assimilated, whether you feel you have arrived, my experience is that one way or the other, the system will deal with you. And hence, many of us survive, with drinking pills and drinking wine and drinking all sorts of things, only to extricate ourselves from this anomy that is visited amongst us. So what then, is to be done? I think that, we should be hopeful for the fact that throughout the centuries and against so much onslaught, we are still here. More than that, we are strong. Our children are growing up strong. Our children are asking the questions that we perhaps did not ask. And so the generations will continue with the struggle that has been imposed upon us. I want to touch, on what I think that our saving grace is going to be, and that is this notion of Ubuntu, well beyond, its bastardization by all and sundry post 1994. I want to attribute the fact that we are still here, the fact that we are so resilient, and the fact that in our way, we also thrive, when we leave that point of encounter, and go home where we find our grandmothers who take us in without asking us where we have been and why are we so wounded. And this hallmark of Ubuntu that is said to be found throughout the continent, in the same way that Prof Zondi recounted how, in Malawi the heads were taken, and how in the Congo the eyes were taken, and how in Kemet the hearts were taken. I would like to argue, have a saving grace called Ubuntu. And this Ubuntu really is not about turning the other cheek. it is really not turning turning the other cheek. For me, Ubuntu, borrowing from Prof Ramos, who's really been a worthy teacher to us, in this space, Ubuntu has something to do with regeneration. This spirit that is not dying. In the same way that Prof Zondi argued so poetically that we are engulfed by a spirit of death. In contrast and in juxtaposition, I would like to argue that as Black people the world over who are similarly besieged, we have been saved by this spirit that Ngugi wa Thiong'o said that if we get alienated from it, the life springs, the life spring of our lives, if we get alienated from it, then we will be decimated as a people. And umuntu, has a sacred responsibility to keep the community healthy and whole. What Magona calls the blessed extended completeness. So we go to the university, we are asked to compromise ourselves. We have to reconfigure ourselves, remold ourselves, remodulate ourselves in order to fit into the culture that is there. When we leave, we find healing in the community. That is why sometimes I think that when we say we do what is called a community engagement in the university, really we are doing disservice to the communities who hold us together when we have been wounded. Despite our accolades, despite our titles, and despite everything else that comes with it, it is the communities that keep us together. So when we go to communities, when we go home, we experience this thing that Sindiwe Magona calls the blessed extended completeness. If it was not for that, I want to argue, perhaps none of us will be here. So, and having said that, and having also spoke about our very own violent acts upon the students who come to us and hope for us to be healers of their wounds that we know so much, and we do the very opposite only because of the kind of place that we find ourselves. So what I'm trying to say really is that having spoken about students, that now that we know that when we assimilate, when we imbibe, when we disseminate the sensibilities and the truisms of the academy and asking and training them to fight against their own nature, we are doing a disservice to a struggle much larger than the individual student and much larger than the individual professor who is trusted with the well-being of the student. And I want to argue that perhaps part of the struggle that we need to be waging is the kind of student we want to graduate. A student who will question, as Prof Zondi was reminding us of Fanon's prayer, a student who will always question and question deeply, deeper than what we have been so far. And I also want to say that, in fact, the students are leading us in this sense. And ours really is to acknowledge this and confirm and affirm, their restless struggle, in the academy. And through the rituals that we partake in, we should always remember that we are making a person. I'm particularly perturbed, really, by the many rituals that are there in the university, beginning from graduation and everything else in between. I would like to challenge all of us to begin to look at these rituals not as innocent acts, but as acts that seek to continue to bewitch us, as Prof Zondi was telling us. So the graduation, the song that is sung at graduation, the mace that comes in, the regalia that we all wear, whose history really I would urge all of us to go and research, because as I began, I said that we have been hollowed out to the extent that we fear our own freedom. And I fear that these rituals and these garments that we wear at graduation and the kind of student that we then graduate, you know, are some of the very, very tangible things that continue to hold us hostage, because they represent an elitism that is part of the system. It is an elitism that takes away from this blessed extended completeness with community. The student that we graduate is a student who wants to be like us, with the very nervous conditions that we exhibit. The student who, when you ask who is your mother, who is your father, they look to us, and we because we have been taught to walk like people who are in the university and who are of the university, they also aspire to be like us. And again, we are, you know, we are cutting our own toes to spite our own feet when we do that. So the kinds of students that we graduate throughout, you know, the formative years and the postgraduate years are students that, you know, while we inculcate humility in them, it should not be a humility of sheepishness, a humility of the humiliated. We should not work so hard to hollow them out while we train them to work against ourselves, that when they do graduate, their way of understanding success is that of having been in combat with the lecturer, and so they need to be in combat with the world, or maybe with the community from which we come. And for me, that's my definition of corruption, that we corrupt students who come to us in good faith. They become corrupted. We touch them with the mace and say that you have succeeded. Yes.
Sorry, Prof. Could you please wrap up? We are time.
Yes, I am. Thank you. We say that you have succeeded, but we ought to be asking what it is that they have succeeded in, and whether they are not going to be the menace that we see in community, and what responsibility do we then take as the university who graduate these students. So just to wrap up, that perhaps our greatest struggle really is the struggle against individualism that is so much part of the academy, that Prof Fikeni and Prof Zondi, you know, spoke to us so eloquently about. And our notions of success and quality and having made it need to really take into cognizance the kinds of debilitation that are part of the system. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof Hlabangane. I apologize sincerely. We are running out of time, something we didn't anticipate. We will engage with Prof Hlabangane after Prof Motsa has made her input. She has touched on a number of things, that we shouldn't claim what is not ours. Masiyeke into zabantu, sinezinto zethu ezisiphilisayo. And also think deeply about what we do and how we do it, especially invoking the concepts of community engagement, what exactly that is. How do we exactly engage meaningfully and honestly with our communities without dehumanizing them, treating them as if we are the holders of knowledge, while the opposite is true. And also thinking deeply about not corrupting the students who come to us. What is it that needs to be done about these institutions so that our students don't leave our shores being worse off than they came in, being a totally different human. So with those words, we will swiftly move to Prof Zodwa Motsa, who is the executive director in the Office of Leadership and Transformation, in the Vice Principal's office, in the Vice Chancellor's office. Prof Motsa will be telling us about the university's responsiveness and readiness to decolonize and transform. Thank you so much, Prof Motsa. We take note that you are not well, but because you care so much about this topic, you decided to come. So Prof Motsa, ladies and gentlemen, will not be long. She's gonna briefly summarize her input because she truly shouldn't be, we are in trouble now with her doctor because she shouldn't even be speaking to us at the moment. We thank her for her generosity. What we'll do after she's spoken, we'll just engage more on the topic that she was, we'll engage it fully after she has spoken. Over to you, Prof Motsa.
Thank you, Zethu. Thank you very much, colleagues and comrades. I particularly want to single out one person that I saw, Miss Jobotwana, a very young lion. Thank you for coming, my daughter. I'm very pleased. Now I feel very comforted to have you. I will not be long, colleagues. I will not be long, but I will just want to pose a few questions that we need to engage continuously and continually. Have we all ever taken time to explore the history of the institution called a university on the continent of Africa? I think it is important for us to actually go back and study all the modalities of colonialism and all the systems that colonialism put in place for its own good, for its own glory, and for its own propagation of dynasty. What is the university doing in Africa? Whose university is it? Sometimes I feel, colleagues, that we are like a supplanted child in someone's yard who goes in there, even though it is in his father's kingdom. The child goes there and says, I feel segregated. I feel unheard. Nobody is listening to me. Nobody is teaching my curriculum and so forth. I think that we have done very successfully, but why do we have this kind of a university? Who has conceived this university? Whose agenda was it created to propagate? Because that university that was created in colonial times had a specific agenda, and it is pushing that agenda, and we've been swallowed in that agenda. We've learned, people like myself and my comrade David Letsoalo have learned English back and forth. We've imbibed this. So Professor Fikeni says it very, very well for me when he says, look at the culture that we've inherited. I want to pause here and say, there lies the rub. We have inherited a foreign culture because by its very nature, inheritance is not getting somebody else's goods into your house. Inheritance is, being handed over your own forefathers' goods. You inherit that which belongs to you. Look what we have inherited. There lies the rub, ladies and gentlemen. This is not our inheritance. This is somebody else's heritage that we have actually taken over to then try and transform, to then try and recalculate, to then try and modify this way and that way. And the owner of this strange inheritance will be forever engaged in games of gatekeeping, in games of keeping us in the margin. I would like to invite us to actually do like the Chinese do. You know, when they plan for a government, they plan for more than 100 years. They don't plan for a 5-term, office, kind of structure. So let us look at the inheritance. And I know we found ourselves here, but I think we're just swimming in somebody else's river or somebody else's swimming pool, and then we're crying foul. We are doing what I call in another article, we are singing the Lord's song in a strange land. We are peddling a curriculum that belongs elsewhere. I will not posit a solution, ladies and gentlemen, because I have seen all my life, all my adult working life, I have worked to position the African voice in whatever I was doing, and I can see that I'm swimming against the tide. So I want to also quickly share with you, colleagues, that do try and spend some time, if you can, and look at the minutes of the Berlin conference. And also just, if you can't find the minutes, just Google, go to YouTube and look at what it is that King Albert promised Queen Victoria, what it is that started that industrial revolution, where the sun began not to sing, to set in the British Empire. You will note, ladies and gentlemen, that that agenda was very well thought out. It was very well structured. There were no egos, but just a focus on the agenda, not necessarily to subdue the African, but to make sure that Europe extracts all the minerals that they can get. So the economic agenda of Europe was of England to be specific, was very clear. It was a cutthroat business. And therefore, the appropriation of rivers and of canals, the Suez Canal and all the roads leading into the sea was in the line of executing that project. It was an economic agenda that meant to empty Africa of its resources. By and large, then matters of education had to follow, matters of appropriating religion and language had to follow, but the main point was an economic agenda that meant to kill, the being of the African. So my suggestion, ladies and gentlemen, is that I think it's important for us as we drive transformation in all fronts to actually step back and try and design where we want to go, not only as a university, but as a continent in the next 100 years. What kind of citizen do we want to groom that will live for the idea of the Africa in the next 200 years? Where are we going with all this? I know that my colleagues have spoken so much about Ubuntu. I want to challenge you, ladies and gentlemen, and say Ubuntu is not the only philosophy which we have that binds Africa together. Let us expand, because I know Unisa is the headquarters of decolonial thinking. Let us share time together, and then let's just go ahead and look at the other systems of governance that have since been buried with our preoccupation with Westernization. For example, we know Ubuntu it's about relating to the society out there. What does Africa teach about me relating with Professor Cakatha as my sister, or as my co-wife, having married the same husband that I've married? What does Africa teach about you as a young man becoming a leader? What does it teach about followership? There are many things, ladies and gentlemen, that this continent teaches. I think Professor Nokuthula is right. We are still here. Our knowledge systems are still here. Our faculties of thinking are still here. Our sciences are still here. Our languages are still here. I'm sure, much as you push the curriculum that you have, which you are transforming, you can create a dynamite of a reading system, of a learning system for the youth that is coming behind. So I'm saying that I'm sure we've talked a lot in the past 4 or 5 years. And I think it is time now that we started seriously digging and archiving and implementing these things that we often talk about and refer to them in our papers. I will end here, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for according me this opportunity. I truly miss it and I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Motsa. At first, you sounded really sick, but as you went on, you sounded very healthy. Maybe you're carrying a philosophy that you didn't want to share with us. Ladies and gentlemen, we have run out of time. So what we will do, Prof. Motsa ended up giving us her presentation. So I do not think we need to engage as planned with her slot. So what we will do, I will take 2 questions from the Zoom platform. I hear we have 2 more questions from our YouTube channel. Let's engage like that. Let's take 2 from the Zoom platform. And then afterwards, I will call upon my assistant on YouTube to kindly share the 2 questions they have. Can I please, my technical manager, assist me in identifying and unmuting the 2 hands? Do you have any questions or points of engagements that you would want to pose? It's an open, you can pose it to any particular speaker, but also you can pose just a general question that any of the speakers could attend to. All right. Okay, Comrade Pindi, do we have anything from YouTube?
Thank you, Chair, and greetings to fellow scholars and our comrades. I do have 2 questions. The first one from Nezi Swatiti Joy. The question to Prof Fikeni: what needs to be done to stop the culture of using Black bodies to advance a colonial agenda? And the second question, Chairperson, we have from Faith Siha, and her question is to Prof Zondi. Do we need to redesign for the new purpose, dismantle to rebuild? Those are the 2 questions I have, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Comrade Pindi. Can we first have a Prof Fikeni?
I would simply say there are 3 simple things that I think we need to do. The first one, as I indicated, is a very important exercise of revisiting our understanding of the problem that we thought we were trying to resolve, because it's quite clear that with partial diagnosis, the remedy is not going to be good. But the second one, which is even more important, is to examine the agents that we are. Are we the agents to carry out this transformation? Are we fit for this transformation? And therefore, as we ask that question, we ought to be self-critical. We ought to unlearn certain tendencies in order to relearn as new agents. As many speakers were saying, we are using the same tools. We are based on the same institutional culture and pan-European, scholarship and thinking. We are using the same strategies, but we are therefore assuming that our Blackness or Africanness alone makes us fit to become agents of transformation. And yet that is not necessarily the case, because in some instances, the dominant system has been able to say when it can no longer resist transformation, it identify the weakest link within ourselves, and it deploys that weakest link and puts it in higher positions, so that that link, which might look black on the outside, is the ultimate discrediting of the very black excellence or African quest for emancipation. So those are some of the things that I think we ought to be looking at and revisit the whole notion of the targets of transformation, the whole notion of using statistics instead of digging deeper to understand the soul, the DNA of our institution, in order to unpack, unbundle them, dismantle them for transformation. Otherwise, right now, it's a band-aid that we've been applying, we've been reforming, as Siphamandla Zondi was saying, the institution rather than transforming it. And also, as Nokuthula was saying, it is a deeply spiritual exercise, but we must, as we conduct that, be as ethical, be as transparent, be as vibrant and critical of each other, because very often in a post-colonial arrangement, people who seek to transform the colonial structures, sometimes if they have not reconscientized themselves, end up mimicking the tendencies of the very institutions they wanted to transform. In a worst case scenario, they end up enjoying the fruits of being positionally within the very institutions they wanted to transform. So we must therefore work on the cadre, on the agents of transformation themselves before we even move forward. And we must also understand that reimagining this future need us to change ourselves. We can never transform these systems if our career ambitions are stronger than transformative instincts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof Fikeni. Prof Zondi, your response, please.
Thank you very much. I agree. I took a lot of note from what was said. I agree. I think in relation to redesigning, I've come to think there are certain things we should do, of course, pragmatic, but in the end, redesigning the curriculum or redesigning the office or redecorating the office or renaming the building would be of no meaning if they were not a form of ritual. Where we are, we were put through rituals. I went to school every day, and I would pray every day, a prayer I didn't understand at school. And there will be rituals that we played at school where a figure like this will be put on the screen, and I'm supposed to recite after the teacher, again. I'm a life of rituals right through, but I didn't know what God I was praying to with those rituals, including Professor Hlabangane was talking about the graduation rituals. And which God am I praying to, wittingly or unwittingly? So whatever we do are rituals, but rituals are meaningless if they are not connected to at least 4 processes. One for me is to unlearn all the things that we knew we needed to unlearn. Secondly, is that whatever we do must be multi-level, must never solve a problem economically or solve a problem educationally or problem healthily. It's waste of time. if the body is sick, healing a finger is only just trying to decide to take a long time to heal a thing. Thirdly, we need to relearn then after unlearning. Relearn the ways of life, because we must lose the ways of death, the ways of barbarity, the ways of oppression, the ways of injustice. We must relearn the new thing. And in the process, we must determine to re-become. In a way, we must then make a new prayer, a prayer like that of Fanon, that, oh, make my body, make me, make this person a person who questions. Because from questions, you seek answers. From questions, you dislocate the present. From questions, you redream and all that. On that basis, lastly, we must never tire of redreaming. I know we do practical things like doing like very specific programs or change management and all that, because we want to do practical things, because the deep spiritual, psychological, philosophical things look to us too abstract to do things, to change things. But we forget that the problem we face is not a physical problem. It's an invisible problem. It's an intangible problem. The reason why, as Professor Fikeni indicated, cannot be measured is that it is designed not to be measured, because that which you can name, you can control. That which you measure, you can undo. That which you can physically identify, you can dismantle. For it not to be dismantled, it must be objective. It must be hidden. It must be, which is why those in scholarship know that we are all taught a ritual. That ritual says, as Siphamandla, when I write, I must hide myself. I must say, we are doing this. I must say, it's possible, the things are like this. Hide myself. But I'm being taught a ritual of power in coloniality. And that weapon of power is for me to be unidentifiable, so that those who oppose won't be able to kill me. And the system operated that way. So it's called the university when it's actually the Western university. It's called the knowledge when it's called the Western knowledge. It's called the HR when it's actually a Western way of organizing people. So they all called things with a silent adjective, because the whole thing is a spiritual project. It's a witchcraft. It's a corruption, as Professor Motsa indicated. So I think we need to reimagine on the basis, therefore, of unlearning, relearning, rebecoming, but only us can do that. And we may not be able to do it as a group, but we need to be able to do it and help each other do it. It might take us long. It's better to go on take a long time going in a right route than find the quickest route to a wrong place. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. Zondi. It is indeed better to take a long route than going the opposite direction that is not taking us anywhere. We have a lot of people agreeing with you. They are saying, yes, Prof. Zondi, you are right. We have Prof. Mogashoa, our president, saying the problem we have as Black people is that we fail to organize ourselves. So we need to strengthen that aspect of our lives to organize ourselves. And as it has been said over and over again, to identify the problem, to unlearn the things that do not serve us, the things that do not belong to us, to relearn and re-become. Thank you very much for your powerful contributions to all our speakers. I wish I could serve you dinner. If we were at Unisa, you know I wouldn't have disappointed you. But right now, I will hand over to our Deputy President, David Letsoalo, Moafrika. He's gonna tell us what to do next. Over to you, DP.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Program Director, Comrade Zethu, of the Black Forum for steering this revolutionary ship with unparalleled agility. I want to thank you further for giving me this opportunity, which is prime indeed, to perform the most important item in the program, the humane item of thanking you all. You all deserve thanks because in these hectic times in human history, we often forget to thank and appreciate those around us. We simply take things for granted. So to the leadership of the Unisa Black Forum, we thank you immensely for this initiative of dealing with the state of our nation, especially in the troubled higher education spaces in this so-called post-apartheid terrain. To all the participants, on behalf of the Black Forum, I thank you profusely for giving us your precious time, lending us your ears, your minds, and above all, your spirit, which is the center from which our knowledge as Africans has been dislocated or dismembered in favor of Plato's project of academus. Let me just steal a few minutes to lament on why we keep on calling ourselves and aspiring to be academics, so-called. A friend of mine, Itumeling, says that academic or academia emanates from Plato's school, which he called academos, which he named after an Athenian god or hero, as it were, the hero of war. So now we're entangled in this kind of thing. And finally, to our panelists, we really cannot thank you enough for braving these COVID-19 challenges in favor of the Emancipation Project as organized by Unisa Black Forum. We thank you all for beating the drums of the revolution in this time and space. You have actually made sure that lockdown does not mean we should lock our radicalism down. So when I actually go into what you said individually, I just feel that we had a very, very big feast of intellectual engagement. Professor Fikeni, how do you actually execute the threat of not telling lies? You actually pierce through the translucent terrains of our pretentious higher education institutions. And I want to thank you for the notion of counterculture. Professor Zondi, you are so cruel. You take people from Aime Sisare, Alimazrui, Ngundwa Tiongo, Fanon in 20 minutes. Where else can you find such a platform? We have no choice but to thank you so much for that kind of high-level engagement. We're proud of such kind of African intellectualism. Our own Nokuthula, you remind us that we are being othered as a majority in our own land. We are complacent and therefore complicit in our own demise. And I want to thank specifically in this matter, Professor Zodwa Motsa. I won't call you by that other name we used in that building, which Nokuthula referred to as a ship of some sort. But the notion of problematizing the foreign concept of a university is very, very important. We are actually dealing with a foreign monster as if it's our own. Comrades, you effectively beat the drums of the revolution whilst right in the belly of the beast, which is a brave thing indeed. I therefore wish you land, I wish you peace, I wish you wealth as Africans. I have nothing to wish for the enemies of humanity. For it's interesting when I say this in incipit, because America Cabral would have clearly understood it. What Professor Fikeni said in quoting America Cabral about telling no lies is exactly what I'm saying, that you have bravely cracked the stone and exploded this thing so that the worm can come out. This is a brave thing indeed, and I think we need such kind of revolutionaries in these rainbow times. You have really blessed us with your revolutionary minds. As the president of the Black Forum, President Mogashoa, said in his opening address. To all the comrades in the Black Forum executive, I don't know whether you realize that you have undone yourself. You have created a problem with this because the stature of this webinar has been placed at a very, very high standard. And I don't think the subsequent webinars you'll organize will ever come closer to this. So this is a problem, a positive problem that I think we need to contend with. So for that, we want to thank you for pitching your standard so high. You don't deal with mediocrity, you don't deal with cowardice. You go for the real issues. You go for revolutionaries when they are called to. And I want to all thank you, every one of you, all of you, sons and daughters of this African soil, the sons and daughters of Azania. Thank you so much.
Enkosi kakhulu DP, siyabulela ngombulelo wakho. Into enhle ayibulela kakhulu Maqabane. Siyanibulela ngobukho benu apha. Siyanibulela ngokushare izimvo zenu nathi. Siphilile kakhulu sizamana nempilo. Iseza kuwa le ndaba. I wish to say a special word of thanks to Pindiwe, Comrade Muhau, and Comrade Zondi. Thank you so much for all your hard work behind the scenes. The beauty we see is owed to all of you. Sibulela nonke ke, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us this evening. Go home safely. If you're still at home, enjoy, stay safe, sanitize, wear your mask when you go outside, and social distance. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.